So first, I just want to say that the this year it's not just about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, although we will be looking at that in isolation this evening or your morning, um, because Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto during this year are making a series of conjunctions, and this is going to actually um, make massive changes and present new opportunities in every aspect of the way that we live. And so tonight, I'm going to just talk on how that might be, how that may unfold, and certainly how it will impact generations, in particular the millennial generations, and consequently how that may shift the existing social order. Um, Here are just the conjunctions of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto that we're going to have this year. So we can see that the Saturn Pluto conjunction is occurring today at 22 degrees of Capricorn. And then, of course, during the year, April, June, and November, we're going to have 3 Jupiter Pluto conjunctions. And then at the end of this year, we're going to have the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which is also an incredibly huge um, conjunction that we'll be seeing on the 21st of December, and that will be at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And the reason it's important to look at these cycles is even though we can assess and analyze them in isolation, they are all operating at the same time. And some of them are quite conflicting. In particular, today with the Saturn Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, is very different to the Jupiter Saturn conjunction at the end of the year in Aquarius. And these are all happening at the same time. So they all have in assessing what may unfold needs to be in context with the other cycles as well. So Saturn conjunct Pluto, deconstruction of our existing social architecture. Now, I'm sort of just going to dive into a little bit of history first, because I think it's important to see what has gone before. Um, uh, and then we can get some idea of how things may unfold in this particular conjunction. Now, the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto last occurred in Capricorn in 1517. Now, Saturn Pluto do conjunct um, every 32 years or so, and the last time they conjunct was in the late 80s. Um, and of course, we're seeing that cycle now, in particular with the issues in the Middle East. When we had the Iraq War in the late 80s, this is now sort of unfinished business, and we're seeing that being played out again. We're also reminded that Saturn Pluto opposition, um, which was exact on the day of 9/11, and that sat at 12 degrees of Gemini and 12 degrees of Sagittarius, which brings in the Sibley US chart, which we'll have a look at later in this talk. Saturn Pluto, though, last conjunct in Capricorn nearly over 500 years ago. Saturn was just before Saturn entered Capricorn, 3 weeks before, to make its conjunction with Pluto at 2 degrees, I think it was, Capricorn. Saturn was coming out of Sagittarius, and it was building by just a couple of degrees to Pluto. And what happened during that period saw the overthrow of the most influential and commanding authority in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is important, that we acknowledge that Martin Luther, when he pinned his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg Castle Church, and what he did is he challenged the status quo, which is very much about what Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn is about. And what he did is he proposed 95 points of discussion. And these points of discussion were very much about how the Vatican at the time, the Catholic Church at the time, both raised its income, how it gained its income, but also how it spent it. So it was challenging authority, and he did not intend for the start of the Reformation to come forward. He did not intend for the Protestant religion to grow his uh, out of him pinning these theses to the door. But what it did do was this very small event at the time actually did see the overthrow of this incredible establishment. And it's and you know, we see this as a point in history, but it is very, very pertinent when we understand what Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn can bring us and what it is about. Capricorn is about authority. It's about responsibility. It's about many things, and we'll have a look at many things that it symbolizes. But this is a very interesting point in our history, which we are all, to this day, still influenced by over 500 years later. Now, I want to just also look at something else that was happening at that period. I spoke about this briefly in December 2017 on the OPAR webinar, when Saturn was ingressing into Capricorn. Because this, again, is an interesting period, but what is so interesting is that with Pluto there, issues of death and anxiety are going to be very, very high. And what happened in 1518 is there was a dancing disease that became known in a very small town in Germany, and where people would come out of their houses and they would be uncontrollably dancing, or so it seemed. And they would continue to dance, and they would actually die dancing. Now, historians have had quite a lot of debate on exactly what went on during this particular incident. And it's become apparent that it wasn't just in this small town of Germany, it was actually in many pockets over Europe during that time. It was one of the coldest winters that Europe had experienced for a very long time, which is what you would expect with Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn. Capricorn is cold, Saturn is cold. We haven't necessarily had that at this point in time. Perhaps without global warming, it may have been cooler. We would never know. But this dancing disease, so people basically, because of the coldness, their agriculture suffered, and there was a lot of starvation and a lot of malnutrition. There's a lot of speculation that that may have been the root of people's behavior at the time. And I think it's important to sort of think about the levels of anxiety that may have been experienced during this period. Saturn is a planet that rules anxiety, and it travels through its own sign of Capricorn that's going to be heightened. As it travels through the sign of Aquarius, its other ruling sign, we will become more aware of it and how to deal with it. But this is also very important just in terms of understanding the cycle.